Most people spend their entire lives trying to change outcomes without ever questioning the rule that produces those outcomes in the first place. They change strategies, they change environments, they change relationships, they change goals. Yet, the same patterns quietly return in different forms. Effort increases, frustration grows, and eventually a silent question appears beneath everything else. Why does life keep responding the same way, no matter how much I try to change it? This question is not philosophical, it is structural. Because beneath every repeated outcome there is a rule being followed with perfect consistency. Not consciously, automatically. This rule does not care about motivation, intention, or desire. It responds to something far more fundamental. And almost everyone breaks it daily without realizing it exists. From the outside, life looks random. From the inside, it feels personal. But from the level where this rule operates, it is neither. It is mechanical, neutral, exact. The same way gravity does not negotiate with belief, this rule does not negotiate with effort. It simply responds. The reason this feels unsettling is because it removes the comfort of chance and replaces it with responsibility. Not moral responsibility, but energetic responsibility. The kind that does not blame or reward, it only reflects. Most people sense this at some point, in moments of exhaustion, in moments when motivation disappears, in moments when trying harder stops making sense. They feel that something invisible is running the system, but they do not have language for it, so they return to what they know. More effort, more thinking, more searching, and the loop continues. What very few realize is that the repetition itself is the message. Life is not resisting you, it is responding to you with extreme accuracy. Not to what you want, not to what you say, but to what you consistently inhabit. This is difficult to see because the rule does not announce itself. It does not punish, it does not reward. It reflects, quietly, relentlessly. The moment you begin to suspect this, your relationship with reality starts to change, because the problem is no longer external, and the solution is no longer force. There is a rule operating beneath your entire life, and whether you recognize it or not, it governs every result you experience. This rule begins shaping your life long before you ever become aware of it, long before conscious choice, long before intention. It forms through emotional conditioning, not logic. As a child, you learn what feels safe, what feels threatening, what feels possible, and what feels out of reach. These impressions are not stored as thoughts. They are stored as states. The body learns before the mind does. It learns what to expect from the world by how it repeatedly feels within it. Over time, those feelings become familiar. Familiar becomes normal. Normal becomes identity. And identity becomes the signal reality responds to. This is why people often recreate similar relationships, similar conflicts, similar limitations, even when circumstances change. The environment changes, but the internal state does not, and reality responds to the state, not the setting. This is not psychological theory, it is observable. Two people can live in the same conditions and experience completely different realities because they inhabit different internal baselines. One expects resistance, one expects flow. Neither expectation is conscious. Both are embodied. This is why affirmations fail when they do not match the body. This is why motivation fades. This is why willpower collapses under stress. The rule does not respond to surface-level intention. It responds to the dominant state the nervous system sustains over time. Most people never question this because it feels invisible. They assume life happens to them. They assume reactions are justified. They assume emotions are responses rather than signals. And so the loop continues. The same emotional posture creates the same energetic output. The same output creates the same reality. This repetition is not punishment. It is precision. The rule is always working, even when you are unaware of it, especially when you are unaware of it. And here is where something important happens. Once you begin to see that your life is not random and not personal, but responsive, you cannot unsee it. You may not fully understand it yet. You may not know how to work with it. but the recognition has begun. And that recognition quietly separates the many from the few, because only a small percentage ever pause long enough to question the rule beneath the pattern. The rest stay busy trying to change the pattern itself. When people begin to sense that something deeper is at work, their first instinct is almost always to try harder. They look for better methods, stronger techniques, more discipline, more knowledge. The assumption is that effort is the missing ingredient, but effort has never been the problem. In fact, effort is often the way the rule continues operating unnoticed. When effort comes from the same internal state, it only amplifies the existing signal. This is why pushing harder often produces faster exhaustion rather than better results. The rule does not measure how much you try. It measures the quality of the state from which you try. Action taken from anxiety produces anxious outcomes. Action taken from scarcity reproduces scarcity. Action taken from tension invites resistance. This is not because reality is hostile, but because it is consistent. Most people confuse movement with change. They assume that activity equals progress. But progress only occurs when the internal baseline shifts. Without that shift, action simply rearranges the surface. The structure underneath remains intact. This is why cycles repeat even after apparent breakthroughs. The external form changes, but the internal reference point does not, and reality always returns to the reference point. This is where frustration builds. Because from the inside it feels unfair. From the outside it looks confusing, but from the level of the rule it is exact. Nothing is going wrong. Nothing is being withheld. The system is responding with precision to the signal being broadcast. This is the moment where many give up or become cynical. They assume life is random or cruel. In truth, they are unknowingly demonstrating the rule. They are remaining in the same state while expecting different feedback. And the rule does not adapt to expectation. It mirrors identity. Until that is understood, effort will always feel heavy, and results will always feel temporary. This is where the rule must be named clearly, because everything begins to make sense once it is seen. Reality does not respond to what you want. It responds to the state you consistently inhabit, not the state you visit occasionally, not the state you imagine, the state you live from. This is the governing rule. It operates beneath belief systems, spiritual practices, and psychological models. It is neutral, it is precise, and it never stops working. The reason so few recognize it is because it does not announce itself. It hides inside familiarity. The state you inhabit feels like you, it feels normal, it feels justified. And because it feels normal, it goes unquestioned. But reality reads that state as information. The body transmits it constantly through posture, breath, tone, reaction, and expectation. The field responds by organizing circumstances that match it. This is why temporary positivity does not create lasting change. It does not alter the baseline. This is why visualization works for some and not for others. It only works when it shifts the state. Once this is understood, the focus moves away from forcing outcomes and towards stabilizing being. You do not need to convince the universe. You need to become coherent. Coherence is what collapses probability. When the internal signal stabilizes, reality reorganizes without negotiation. This is not something you do once. It is something you live. And the moment this clicks, something quiet but profound happens. The struggle with reality begins to loosen because you are no longer fighting effects. You are addressing cause. And that is the difference between effort and influence. Once the rule is seen, attention naturally shifts to the body, because the body is where the state is actually held. This is where most misunderstandings about manifestation quietly collapse. People assume the mind is the transmitter. It is not. The mind generates ideas, but the body broadcasts reality. The nervous system carries the dominant signal through muscle tension, breathing patterns, posture, and emotional reflex. This signal is continuous. It does not turn off when you stop thinking about it. This is why change that remains mental never stabilizes. You can think abundance while your body is braced for loss. You can visualize peace while your nervous system is prepared for threat. Reality responds to the broadcast, not the concept. The state you inhabit is somatic before it is intellectual. It is felt before it is named. This is why moments of true alignment often arrive unexpectedly. Something relaxes, breath deepens, resistance drops, and suddenly things move without effort. These moments reveal the mechanics clearly. When the body exits survival mode, the signal changes, and reality adjusts. Most people live in a constant low-level state of contraction without noticing it. They call it responsibility, ambition, or realism. The rule reads it as tension, and tension produces friction. This is why the same efforts feel heavy for some and light for others. The difference is not skill, it is state. The 1% understand this intuitively or through experience. They regulate before they act. They stabilize before they decide. They do not rush to fix outcomes. They shift the internal posture that generates them. This is why their actions carry weight without strain. The body leads, the mind follows, and reality mirrors the coherence. When the state changes, effort loses its dominance, influence replaces force, and life begins responding with less resistance because the signal it receives is no longer fragmented. This is also where it becomes clear why the majority never recognize the rule, even when it is explained to them. They confuse thought with identity. They assume that because they think differently, they are being differently. But thinking is intermittent. Identity is sustained. A thought passes, a state persists. Reality ignores what passes and responds to what remains. This distinction is subtle but decisive. It explains why insight alone does not change lives. It also explains why emotional patterns repeat even after understanding them. Awareness without stabilization does not alter the signal. The 1% are not those who understand more concepts. They are those who notice what state they return to under pressure. That is identity. That is the signal. And that is what governs outcomes. Most people never observe themselves at this level. They live inside reaction. They justify emotional responses. They call them normal, necessary, reasonable. The rule does not judge these states. It simply responds. This is why life appears unfair when viewed from the level of intention. From the level of state, it is consistent. Once this is recognized, something important shifts. You stop trying to escape discomfort by thinking your way out of it. You stay present long enough for the body to settle. This settling is not suppression. It is regulation. And regulation changes the broadcast. The moment the signal stabilizes, reality begins to rearrange. Often quietly, often without drama. This is why real change rarely feels exciting at first. Excitement belongs to the mind. Alignment belongs to the body. The 1% learn to trust this difference. They stop chasing emotional highs and start stabilizing coherence. And because coherence is what the rule responds to, their lives begin to reflect something entirely different. Not because they became special, but because they stopped violating the rule that was always in effect. At some point, a clear divergence appears between those who remain trapped in reaction and those who begin operating from coherence. This is where the 1% separate themselves, not by status or intelligence, but by orientation. They stop asking how to change reality and start asking what state they are living from. This shift sounds subtle, but it reorganizes everything. Instead of reacting to circumstances, they observe how circumstances affect their internal posture. They notice when tension rises, when urgency appears, when fear tightens the body, and rather than acting from those signals, they pause. This pause is not hesitation, it is authority. It prevents the old state from broadcasting itself again. Over time, this changes their baseline. The state they return to after stress becomes calmer, more neutral, more grounded. And because identity is what you return to under pressure, this is where identity actually changes. The 1% do not suppress emotion. They allow it to move without letting it define them. They breathe through contraction. They soften instead of hardening. This may look passive from the outside, but it is deeply active at the level of signal. Each time they choose regulation over reaction, the broadcast shifts, and reality adjusts accordingly. This is why their lives begin to show a different pattern. Less chaos, fewer repeated conflicts, cleaner timing. Not perfect, but coherent. They are no longer feeding the same loops. The rule has not changed. Their relationship to it has. This is the quiet power of the pause. It interrupts the cycle at the source. Most people never pause long enough to feel the state they are inhabiting. The 1% do, and that single difference governs everything that follows. As coherence stabilizes, external signs begin to change in ways that are easy to miss if you are looking for dramatic proof. The shift is subtle. Effort decreases. Resistance softens. Situations that once demanded force begin resolving with less friction. You may notice that conversations flow more easily. Decisions feel clearer. Opportunities appear without pursuit. These are not rewards. They are reflections. Reality is responding to a cleaner signal. The nervous system is no longer broadcasting urgency or lack, so the field does not return urgency or lack. This is why alignment often feels underwhelming at first. The mind expects excitement. The body experiences relief. Relief is the signature of coherence. Anxiety fades not because everything is solved, but because the signal is no longer conflicted. Another sign appears in how time behaves. Things stop feeling delayed, not because they arrive instantly, but because waiting loses its charge. When the state stabilizes, impatience dissolves. And without impatience, resistance drops. The 1% recognize these signs not as confirmation to celebrate, but as feedback to maintain regulation. They do not grasp at improvement. They do not announce progress. They simply continue inhabiting the state that produced the shift. This is critical. The moment you try to capitalize on alignment, you reintroduce tension. The rule responds instantly. Coherence attracts. Grasping repels. This is why those who truly understand the rule move quietly. They let results integrate naturally. They allow reality to reorganize at its own pace. They know that maintaining the state is the work. Everything else follows automatically. As the state changes and coherence stabilizes, an unexpected phase often appears. The old life begins to lose its grip. Interests fade. Patterns that once felt familiar stop making sense. What used to motivate you no longer carries weight. This can feel unsettling if you are not prepared for it. Many interpret this phase as failure or stagnation. In reality, it is collapse, not a breakdown, but a release. The reality that was organized around your previous state can no longer sustain itself when the signal changes. Structures built on tension require tension to remain standing. When tension dissolves, they weaken. This is why some relationships drift away without conflict. Why certain ambitions lose their appeal. Why old fears no longer trigger the same reaction. The mind often tries to resurrect them out of habit, but the body no longer agrees. This mismatch creates a quiet emptiness, a pause between identities. The 1% recognize this not as loss but as recalibration. They do not rush to fill the space. They allow the old structure to finish dissolving. This patience is essential. If you rush to replace the old with something new too quickly, you rebuild from the same baseline. The rule requires stability, not urgency. During this phase, life may appear quieter, less dramatic, less stimulating. This is not absence. It is neutrality. And neutrality is fertile. It allows a new configuration to emerge without distortion. Most people abandon the process here because it lacks emotional payoff. The 1% stay. They understand that silence is not emptiness. It is alignment without interference. Stabilizing the new state does not require discipline in the traditional sense. It requires honesty. Honesty about what pulls you out of coherence. Honesty about how quickly you return to tension. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to shorten recovery time. Regulation becomes the priority. Presence becomes the anchor. When stress arises, you notice it earlier. When contraction appears, you soften sooner. This is how identity changes in practice, not through dramatic transformation, but through consistency. Each return to coherence reinforces the signal. Over time, this becomes automatic. The body learns a new default. And once the default changes, effort becomes unnecessary. You are no longer trying to maintain alignment. You are living from it. The rule responds immediately, not with spectacle but with stability. Life becomes simpler, Not easier, but clearer. You stop overcorrecting. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop interpreting every event as a sign. You trust the feedback loop because you understand it. Reality reflects the state you inhabit. If something feels off, you adjust the state, not the world. This is the final shift before sovereignty. You no longer outsource power to circumstances. You hold it internally through coherence. The 1% are not immune to challenge. They are immune to fragmentation. And because of that, their lives unfold with a consistency that looks like luck from the outside. But it is not luck. It is alignment sustained long enough to become identity. If you are still listening at this point, this understanding is no longer abstract for you. Something has already shifted in how you perceive your own experience. You may recognize moments in your past when this rule briefly revealed itself. Times when life flowed without effort. Times when decisions felt obvious. Times when struggle disappeared, not because circumstances changed, but because you did. These moments were not accidents. They were temporary alignments, glimpses of coherence before identity stabilized again around old states. Most people dismiss these moments as luck or coincidence. The 1% notice them. They recognize that those moments felt different, not emotionally, but structurally. There was less urgency, less mental noise, less internal resistance. Life responded differently because the signal was different. This realization creates a quiet shift in self-perception. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to control outcomes and start recognizing yourself as someone learning to maintain a state. This is the point where the rule stops feeling external and starts feeling intimate. It is no longer something governing your life from outside. It is something you are participating in consciously. This participation brings calm rather than excitement. Excitement belongs to anticipation. Calm belongs to recognition. The more you recognize this, the less you need validation. You no longer measure progress by visible results alone. You feel it internally as stability, as consistency, as a reduced need to push. This is why understanding the rule changes how you relate to time. You stop rushing toward futures. You stop reliving pasts. You inhabit the present with more authority. And presence is where the rule is easiest to work with, because the present is where state can actually be felt and adjusted. This is the moment many never reach, not because it is complex, but because it requires stillness. And stillness is uncomfortable for those who rely on effort to feel in control. If you are here listening calmly, allowing this understanding to settle, you are already demonstrating the difference. Not because you are special, but because you are willing to observe rather than react. That willingness is what separates the few from the many. The final integration is simple, but it is not passive. You no longer ask how to force life to change. You ask what state you are sustaining right now. You understand that reality is not something to fight or convince. It is something that reflects with absolute accuracy. This removes blame. It removes guilt. It removes the illusion of randomness. What remains is responsibility without pressure. You regulate, you return to coherence, and you let reality respond. This is the only rule that has ever governed your life. It was active before you knew it. It will remain active whether you acknowledge it or not. The difference now is awareness. Awareness transforms inevitability into agency. You are no longer violating the rule unconsciously. You are cooperating with it deliberately. This cooperation does not require constant vigilance. It requires presence. When tension appears, you notice it. When urgency rises, you soften. When identity tightens, you release. Each time you do this, the signal stabilizes, and the world responds accordingly. This is not mysticism, it is mechanics. The 1% do not control reality. They stop interfering with it. And because of that, reality organizes itself with less resistance. Before you leave, there is one simple way to seal this recognition, not as belief, but as orientation. Not as a request, but as acknowledgement. Go to the comments and write, "I choose my state," nothing more. This is not for the algorithm, it is for you. A quiet confirmation that you understand where influence actually lives. The rule was never hidden, it was simply overlooked. And now that you see it, you do not need to do anything dramatic. You only need to remain coherent. Everything else will follow.